All right, let us bring in CBS News Chief White House Correspondent Major Garrett joining us from the White House. Thank you so much, Major. So we got a little bit of clarification about this carrier group that we know is now headed towards the Korean Peninsula. It was not a week ago. Anything more from the White House or the Defense Department, maybe clarifying the source of all this confusion?
No, the White House just keeps pointing at the Pentagon and through the Pentagon to Pacific Command, which is the one that put out the release that's saying that the USS Vinson, the aircraft carrier, and its strike force were heading to the Western Pacific, canceling a stop in Indonesia and moving in that direction. Now, here's why this is important. It's not just a matter of were they lost. They weren't lost. The vessels in this strike group knew where they were going, but it's all about intentions and the signals a strike force, meaning a carrier and the attendant vessels that travel with it, send to the North Koreans. And let's just remember this. 2 weeks ago, two destroyers, the Ross and the Porter, were in the Mediterranean. Then they steamed toward the coast of the Middle East. And what did they do? They fired 59 missiles into Syria. So the movement of armed U.S. vessels can mean something. And in this context of what the North Koreans are or are not assuming about U.S. intentions, where that aircraft carrier strike force is and what intentions it may be is a very relevant question. And that's why this has created not just something that the White House feels defensive about, but U.S. allies in the region are saying, wait a minute, don't you understand? The North Koreans are volatile. They may or may not understand the signal you're trying to send. And when Kim Jong-un, the dictator of North Korea, talks about preemptive strikes or trying to gauge whether the United States is preparing to strike North Korea, the movements of an aircraft carrier and a strike force may factor into that. It leaves open at least the theoretical possibility of miscalculation. Now, there is this sort of countervailing conversation going on here at the White House that this is all part of what the president likes to do, keep people guessing, never make clear his actual intentions, never take anything off the table, and leave people a little uncertain what he's doing or what he intends to do. But with the situation in the North Korea and its nuclear program, its on-edge mentality about what the United States may or may not do preemptively, this has rattled the South Koreans, it has somewhat rattled the Japanese, and created a secondary conversation about what the United States is actually trying to accomplish in North Korea that undercuts these very delicate negotiations with the Chinese and them applying pressure on North Korea to reduce and not increase tensions.
Right, and add to that something that we heard from the Secretary of State Rex Tillerson yesterday. He sort of ratcheted up the rhetoric on North Korea. What did we hear from him yesterday that we have not heard yet so far?
So in the Bush administration, George W. Bush, hoping that a concession to North Korea would deter it from pursuing nuclear weapons and the ballistic missile technology to deliver them to the mainland United States, took North Korea off the list of state sponsors of terrorism. That was a hope that a concession might lead to negotiation and a workable result. It did not. The North Koreans took that concession, continued research on their nuclear weapons themselves, and the ballistic missile technology they hope might someday allow them to be delivered, or at least threaten to be delivered, to the mainland of the United States. What Secretary of State Tillerson said yesterday is we're going to review that decision. We may place North Korea back on the list of state sponsors of terrorism, and that would further isolate North Korea and place China's longstanding relationship with North Korea in the context of it's not just a geographical ally of yours, it's a state sponsor of terrorism, and now you're crossways with the United States on that. So that's a new dimension to the diplomatic toolkit the administration is trying to use with North Korea. And it's worth pointing out that there's been a lot of bluster and a lot of rhetoric the last couple of weeks, but it appears most of what this administration is focused on is economic sanctions and diplomatic pressure. Many of the exact same tools attempted to be used unsuccessfully by the Obama administration, the George W. Bush administration, and the Clinton administration before that.
Yeah, very good point. Rex Tillerson also talked about Iran and promised a comprehensive review of the Iran nuclear deal. I want to play a little bit of sound and then we'll talk about it on the other side. Let's listen to this.
This deal represents the same failed approach of the past that brought us to the current imminent threat we face from North Korea. The Trump administration has no intention of passing the buck to a future administration on Iran. The evidence is clear. Iran's provocative actions threaten the United States, the region, and the world.
So, some tough talk for sure, but the interesting thing about that statement is it came just hours after the State Department confirmed that Iran is complying with the nuclear deal. So what exactly is this administration so concerned about in regards to that deal? And the other thing I want to bring up is, can we really exit from that deal? I mean, it's not a deal between America and Iran. It's a deal between America, Iran, and a number of other countries.
Right, the P5+1. Great Britain is involved. Germany is involved. Russia is involved. China is involved. It is not just a bilateral agreement, as you said, Anne-Marie, between the United States and Iran. And for all practical purposes, that deal is going to remain. There is no real exit strategy for this administration to leave the understanding it reached with those nations and Iran about removing all of the underlying both technology and fuel sources for a future nuclear weapon. But what the administration is saying, and what President Trump said when he was a candidate, it's a bad deal, we should cancel it. Well, that's not going to happen. But he also said that deal ignored all the other things that Iran does, as from the perspective of the United States, is evidence of it being a bad actor, a state sponsor of terrorism, supporting groups that are hostile to U.S. allies in the Middle East. And those kind of activities, the State Department, through Secretary of State Tillerson, said are now part of this larger conversation. The Iran nuclear deal is not going to be dealt with and viewed in isolation from Iran's other behavior. And if its other behavior harms or threatens U.S. interests, that will be taken into consideration. That is a departure from the Obama administration, because President Obama believed, and he built much of his foreign policy with Iran around one central perspective, which is if you try to solve the nuclear deal and create a space, 10, 15 years, where Iran cannot obtain a nuclear weapon, a lot of other things become less threatening. And dealing with that issue was the first and foremost goal of his foreign policy with Iran. The Trump administration doesn't believe that. What they're saying is, yes, the Iran nuclear deal is complying, it's valid, it's probably going to stay, but everything else Iran does is now part of the larger conversation, and the United States will pursue sanctions or other means of deterring Iran from those other behaviors, which this administration asserts is just as threatening, or are just as threatening, as its pursuit of a nuclear weapon.
All right, Major Garrett at the White House. Thank you so much, Major.
Sure.